When I think of love, not just the feeling but the whole slow ache of it, I remember Plato, not for his logic or his arguments but for his dream, that love is a path, a sacred stairway, climbing upward through beauty towards something eternal. And somewhere inside me I've always known this to be true. You see, when I fall in love, it feels like remembering. Like I've seen this face before, heard that voice in another life. Plato would say it's not a trick of memory, it's real. He believed that before we were born, our souls dwelled in a place beyond time, where they beheld the pure forms of things, the form of justice, the form of truth, and above all, the form of beauty. We have forgotten that world, but not entirely. The soul remembers faintly. And when I see someone who stirs me, when something in their eyes or the way they laugh sets something alight inside me, I feel it. Not just desire, but longing, a kind of homesickness for something I can't name. Plato called that longing eros. But eros isn't just passion. It's the flame that pulls us upward toward what we once knew and now yearn for again. The body, the smile, the nearness of the beloved, they're just the first rung on the ladder. Beautiful, yes, precious, but not the end. In those first moments of falling in love, everything glows. The world feels more alive. I notice details I never saw before. The air itself feels different. It's like my soul has grown wings. Plato actually said that. Love gives wings to the soul, and I've felt that flight, that lift, that movement towards something more. But the ascent isn't easy, it's not painless. Because while love gives me a glimpse of something higher, it also reminds me of the distance. I see beauty, but I can't hold it forever. I try, but it slips through. That's part of the ache, part of the sweetness too. Plato never asked us to reject physical love. He just asked us not to stop there. He believed that if we looked through the beloved, past the surface, past the particular, we would see a light that belongs not just to them but to something eternal. That's what I've come to believe too. There's a ladder in Plato's Symposium. It begins with the love of a single beautiful body. That's where I usually begin, charmed, entranced, captured by someone's presence. But from there, Plato says we climb, from one body to all beautiful bodies, then to beautiful souls, then to ideas, to wisdom, to the beauty and goodness and truth. Until finally, we see beauty itself, not in a face, not in a form, but as something unchanging, deathless, infinite. I don't know if I've climbed all those steps yet. Some days I feel like I've barely begun. Other days I catch a glimpse, brief but blinding, of something more, something beyond. And even if it vanishes, I'm changed by it. That's why I love Plato, because he didn't make love smaller. He made it bigger than the world. He said that when I love well, truly, deeply, I'm doing philosophy with my heart. I'm remembering who I really am. And when I'm lying here quiet in the dark, letting memories and hopes drift in and out like tides, I feel that movement, that ascent. Slow, patient, sacred. Love is the soul's way of going home. Sometimes I wonder if every person I've ever loved was really just one soul, appearing in different forms. A familiar light, reshaped in different faces, reminding me again and again of something I still haven't quite reached. Each one left behind not just memories, but a strange kind of echo, like footsteps from a place I've never been, yet somehow remember. Plato would say that's because I have been there, not with my body, but with my soul. He spoke of the world of forms, a dimension beyond the senses where beauty, truth, and goodness exist in their most perfect state. Here, love isn't a feeling, it's recognition. The soul sees something it once knew, and when that recognition happens, it stirs. That stirring is what we call love, but beneath it is remembrance. I can't help but think of certain moments, quiet ones, when I was with someone I loved and time seemed to stop. We weren't talking, we weren't touching, we were just there, present, breathing the same moment, and something passed between us, not desire, not even comfort, but a kind of clarity. I didn't want anything from them, I didn't even want them to stay. I just wanted that stillness to last. That feeling of being gently suspended between time and eternity. Plato might call that a glimpse of the eternal through the particular. And he teaches that those moments are meant to awaken us, not to make us cling tighter, but to remind us that the beauty we see in the beloved is a doorway, a sacred crack in the wall between this world and something divine. But of course, we often get stuck. I know I do. I fall in love with the form, the body, the idea of who someone is. I try to possess what I'm meant to contemplate, and the more I try to hold it, the more it slips away. Beauty isn't meant to be captured, it's meant to be followed, like a trail of light leading you inward, then upward. That's the paradox. The more I understand love in this way, the more reverent I become. Not just toward those I love, but toward the very act of loving. It's not a game, it's not a transaction, it's a pilgrimage. One I make again and again, sometimes with joy, sometimes through heartbreak, always carrying the same yearning. And it's not always toward people. Sometimes it's a sunset, or music, or the way a single candle flickers in a quiet room. Those things too hold pieces of the form, reminders that I'm part of something more, something vast, something ungraspable. The Greeks called it kalon, a word that means both beauty and nobility. Beauty isn't just what pleases the eye. It's what elevates the soul. And every time I love someone deeply with that trembling sense of awe, it feels like something inside me lifts just a little. I become more than who I was. I am drawn, as Plato says, to become a philosopher-lover, a seeker of what lies beyond. This doesn't mean the person I love disappears. Far from it. It means I love them more truly. Not as a possession, not even as a mirror of myself, but as a spark of the infinite, a guide, a sacred companion. And maybe that's the gentlest truth of all, that love, real love, is not an end, but a beginning, a doorway to something higher, something more whole, something I don't yet understand but feel drawn to every time I look into the eyes of someone I've loved and feel not hunger but silence, not urgency but peace. Plato's vision of love may seem abstract, but to me it feels intimate, personal, because I've lived it, not just in joy but in grief, in the way certain losses hollowed me out, and yet left behind more space for light. In the way I've sometimes walked away from someone I loved, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood I was only meant to see through them, not hold them forever. They were a mirror, a window, a flame on the path. I think that's why Plato insists the journey of love is also the birth of the philosophic soul. Love isn't separate from wisdom, it's the very beginning of it. Not because it teaches us answers, but because it asks the most beautiful questions. What is beauty really? What do I seek in another? What am I made for? What is the source of this longing inside me? And it's okay that I don't have perfect answers. It's enough that I keep climbing. When I think of love, not just the fluttering feeling or the rush of connection, but something deeper, quieter, I always find myself thinking of Plato. Not because he was a romantic in the modern sense, but because he saw love as something holy, something that reaches far beyond attraction, far beyond even the beloved, something that reveals who we truly are. Plato believed that every soul remembers. Before birth, he said, our souls lived in a higher realm, a place beyond time, beyond matter, where we saw the purest forms of truth, justice, and beauty. But when we entered the world of bodies, we forgot. And yet, not entirely. Some small part of us still recalls that light, that clarity. And it stirs whenever we glimpse beauty here on earth. That stirring is love, and I've felt it. I think we all have. That moment when you look into someone's eyes or watch the wind moving through the trees at dusk and something inside you aches, not with pain exactly, but with recognition. As if you're remembering something you were never taught, as if the world is whispering, you've been here before. Plato called that longing eros, but not the shallow version of eros we often think of. His eros wasn't just desire for the body, it was the soul's hunger to return to what it once knew, a divine homesickness, a quiet pull upward. When I fall in love, or even when I stand quietly in the presence of beauty, I sometimes feel my soul stretch. I feel a kind of reaching, like wings unfolding. It's not always comfortable, sometimes it hurts, but in that ache, there's also clarity. The beloved in those moments becomes more than a person. They become a portal. Through them, I begin to see something eternal shining through the temporary. And yet, I don't always recognize it. Often I get caught in the form. I fall in love with the surface, the smile, the voice, the warmth, and I forget to look deeper. But when I remember, even for a moment, that what I love is not just them, but something through them, the whole experience changes, it softens, it deepens, it opens into silence. Plato describes love as a ladder, a gentle ascent. It begins with physical attraction, one beautiful body, one moment of connection. But if I allow myself to keep climbing, I begin to notice beauty everywhere, in many bodies, in many souls. I begin to love not just the individual, but the essence that moves through all things. From there, my heart may open further to beauty in thought, in virtue, in ideas. And at the top of the ladder, if I am willing to surrender fully, I may come to gaze upon beauty itself, the eternal, unchanging source that gives meaning to every lesser love. I haven't climbed all the way yet, but I've taken steps, I've seen glimpses. Sometimes in a lover's presence, other times in the solitude of night. I've sat in stillness and felt something larger than myself, a presence I can't name. And in those moments I realize, love isn't pulling me away from truth. It's leading me toward it. That's the beauty of Plato's vision. It doesn't ask us to reject earthly love. It asks us to follow it inward and upward, to let the longing guide us, to understand that the person we love isn't the destination, but a companion on the path, a spark that lights the way. And I've come to trust that path, slowly. Sometimes through joy, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through the quiet loneliness that love leaves behind. Because even the ache is holy, even the longing is sacred. It tells me I am still on the journey, still climbing, still remembering. So now, when I love differently. I love with more reverence, more spaciousness. I try not to cling. I try to see the eternal within the temporary. I try to recognize that every touch, every word, every moment of connection is a step on the ladder. And I try to say thank you silently, inwardly, for the chance to rise. I may never reach the final step, but that's not the point. The beauty is in the motion, in the opening, in the remembering, and so I close my eyes now, not to escape the world, but to sink more deeply into it, to listen for the echo of beauty, to let the memory of what I once knew drift softly through me, to feel the wings of my soul stirring once again. Love is not distraction, it is return. It is the soul, remembering the light. I don't remember the first time I read Rumi. It wasn't a moment. It was a slow unfolding, like waking into a dream I hadn't realized I was dreaming. His words didn't strike me as poetry at first. They felt more like music I'd somehow heard before inside myself, like I was reading echoes. And all of it pointed back to one thing: love. But not love as we usually talk about it. Not love as comfort or romance or even connection. For Rumi, love is something more dangerous, more wild, more holy. He called it divine madness. And somehow I understood. Because there have been moments in my life, strange, luminous moments, when I loved someone or something so deeply it felt like I was coming apart. Not broken but burning, not suffering exactly but melting into something vast and unknowable. I've tried to explain it, but there are no words, only silence, only surrender. That's what Rumi writes about. He tells us again and again that to truly love is to lose yourself, not in another person but in the flame that lives between you, in the presence that speaks through eyes and hands and longing. He says love is the fire that burns the house of the ego to the ground. And I've felt that fire. It's the ache that comes when someone looks at you and sees past your walls. It's the trembling you feel when you realize you can't control how deeply you care. It's the silence that enters a room when two people drop their masks, and for a breathless moment no one is pretending. Rumi wasn't afraid of that fire. He called it the soul's alchemy. He believed that in this burning something higher is revealed. He spoke of the beloved, not always a person, sometimes a presence, sometimes God. And he wrote as if he were drunk with longing. He said the beloved is both the wound and the cure, the absence and the fullness, the silence and the song. And I know what he means. Sometimes I've looked into the face of someone I love and felt like I was staring into the infinite. Not because of who they were, but because of what was shining through them. For a moment I could almost touch it, that boundless aching mystery, that thing that has no name. Rumi called it union, not the merging of bodies or the clinging of hearts, but a dissolving, a return, as if the self falls away and what's left is just presence, just being, just breathe. And in that stillness you remember that love isn't something you do, it's what you are. He often wrote of Shams, the wandering mystic who appeared in his life like lightning and changed everything. Their connection wasn't ordinary, it wasn't even explainable. It shattered Rumi's ordered world and awakened the divine madness inside him. After Shams disappeared, perhaps murdered, perhaps ascended, Rumi's poetry deepened. His grief became a kind of praise. His longing became his teacher. That's how I think of love now, not as something that completes me, but as something that undoes me in the most beautiful way. I've stopped asking love to be easy. I no longer want only the sweetness. I want the fire too. I want the part that teaches me how to let go, how to fall, how to vanish into something wider than thought. Sometimes I lie awake and whisper his lines to myself like a lullaby made of stars and ashes. This is love. To fly toward a secret sky, to cause 100 veils to fall each moment. I don't know where this path will take me, but I trust it now, even when it hurts. Even when it leaves me speechless. Because somewhere in the center of that silence, I can feel the beloved listening. There's a line Rumi wrote that I return to often like a whisper inside me that never fully fades. The beloved is a mirror. You see nothing but your own reflection. The first time I read that, I paused. I read it again and again, because something about it felt both unsettling and true. Could it be, I wondered, that the people I've loved most weren't just them but also me, reflected through the soft glass of their presence? Over time, I've come to see what Rumi meant. Love is not about possession. It's not even always about understanding. Sometimes it's about seeing yourself in the face of another, clearly, honestly, without distortion. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Because love doesn't just show me the light, it shows me the shadows too. The places I'm afraid to look, the parts of me I keep hidden. When I've loved deeply, without hiding, without pretending, I've been confronted with myself. My longings, my fears, my fragile hopes, my tendency to grasp, my aching need to belong. And yet, in those same moments, I've also seen beauty I didn't know I carried. I've heard laughter in my own voice that surprised me. I've felt a softness in my own presence that only showed up when I was safe in someone's arms. The beloved in this way becomes a sacred mirror, not because they define who I am, but because through them I remember. I see the truth of myself. I see the soul underneath the story. And what's even more beautiful, more humbling, is that this mirror doesn't always come in the form of a lover. Sometimes it's a stranger, a child, a tree, a poem. Rumi's path of love is not confined to one form. It expands. It moves like water. The beloved can appear anywhere because in truth, the beloved is everywhere. Once in the stillness of a winter night, I sat by a window watching the stars emerge. There was no one beside me, no voice, no music, just silence. And in that silence, something stirred. A kind of warmth, not from the world, but from within. It felt like love, not directed at anyone, not coming from anyone, just love being love. Rumi would say that's because in those rare and precious moments I wasn't separate anymore. The I that wants, that waits, that longs was gone. And what remained was simply presence. He writes, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." I think about that often when I'm missing someone, when love feels far away. I remind myself that love is not something I need to chase. It's something I need to remember. It's already here, already inside me, already me. And yet it's also more than me. Because true love, the kind Rumi speaks of, never leaves us where it finds us. It changes us. It dissolves the boundaries we cling to. It softens the walls we built to stay safe. It asks us to go deeper, to shed our stories, to step into the fire and emerge undefended. Sometimes that fire is gentle, sometimes it burns, but always, always, it purifies. Rumi didn't write about love in theory. He wrote from experience. His words came from longing, from surrender, from ecstasy, from grief. His verses are drenched in the ache of absence and the joy of reunion. He knew that love is not always easy, but it is always holy. And when I let go of trying to define it, when I stop asking love to make sense or follow rules, I feel that holiness. Not in lightning or thunder, but in stillness, in breath, in the soft golden hush that falls between words. There's no map for this kind of love, no formula, no guarantee, but there is a path, a spiral, a pull inward, and each time I follow it, I find less of me and more of something wordless, timeless, unbreakable. Love in the end is not about finding the right person, it's about becoming the right presence. Sometimes I sit in silence and wonder what's left of me when I stop needing to be someone. No name, no story, no I to protect, just breathe, just being. It's in those moments that I begin to understand what Rumi meant by union. Not the romantic merging of two people, not even the spiritual closeness of souls, but something vaster. Something that makes the idea of two, of self and other, melt away altogether. He writes, "I am not this hair, I am not this skin, I am the soul that lives within." But even that soul, he hints, is not ours to hold. Even that must dissolve, because the deeper we go into love, the less there is of me and you. There is only this presence, this stillness, this sacred now. I have touched that space briefly. Not often, not for long, but enough to know it's real. It never comes when I chase it. It arrives like a hush, like a soft light pouring through the cracks. It shows up when I stop trying to be worthy, when I forget to ask anything of love. It's in those quiet folds of surrender that I feel the borders of my being disappear, and what remains is something without a name. Not even peace, not even bliss, just truth. Rumi says when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, not even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. And I know that grass. I've laid there not with a lover's hand in mine, but with my own self vanished. No desires, no future, just presence as wide and wordless as the sky. It's not always joyful, sometimes it's terrifying. Because to lose the self is to lose control, to die before you die. But Rumi urges us to go there anyway, to leap into that unknown. Because what waits on the other side is not emptiness, it is fullness. A fullness so complete it can no longer be named love or God or me. It simply is. In this kind of love, there's nothing to do, no one to impress, no steps to perform. There is only being, only merging, only a flame that no longer separates itself from the fire. This is the union Rumi speaks of, not a coming together, but a melting away. And once that union is known, even for a moment, everything changes. I walk differently, I speak less, I listen more. I see beauty not as decoration, but as revelation. I begin to recognize the beloved not just in faces and poetry, but in the dirt, the noise, the aching silence between my thoughts. Because the beloved is no longer outside of me, the beloved is me, and you and everything. Rumi wrote, "You were born with wings, why prefer to crawl through life?" And I feel those wings now, not on my back, but in my breath. In the way I sit still at the end of the day and no longer try to explain what I feel. In the way I let the world pass without needing to fix it or claim it. Love in this way is no longer a search, it is a return. And in that return, nothing is missing. No union is needed because union has already happened. No God must be reached because God is already here. Rumi's madness was not the chaos of emotion. It was the madness of clarity, the wildness of a heart that has burned away everything false and now sees only the real. And I want that madness, not because it's beautiful, but because it's true. Sometimes when I'm quiet, when the world fades and only my own thoughts remain. I wonder if I have truly loved, not just desired or admired or hoped, but loved, in the way Kierkegaard might have meant. He didn't write about love as comfort. He didn't describe it as a path of ease. For him, love was trembling. It was risk. It was the deepest kind of vulnerability, the kind that cannot be calculated or earned or guaranteed. He called it a leap of faith. And that phrase has stayed with me. It echoes in places I didn't know had voices because I think I've always wanted love to be safe, predictable, something I could hold in both hands, examine, and make sense of. But love, real love, doesn't work that way. Kierkegaard believed that love doesn't exist in logic. It exists in the space beyond it, in that mysterious realm where you choose to give your heart, not because you know the outcome, but because something inside you says yes. It's not blind, it's not reckless, it's brave. And that's the part I keep returning to, the courage it takes to love when there are no promises. To say I care for you without knowing if it will be returned. To open your soul knowing it might be misunderstood. I've done that sometimes, not often, but enough to know the trembling that Kierkegaard described. That feeling of standing at the edge of yourself with no handrail, no map, just the heartbeat of something greater whispering jump. And sometimes I've jumped. I've said I love you without being sure. I've waited. I've stayed. I've walked away. All of it, every ache and silence and shiver has been a part of that great human experiment called love. And when I look back, I don't regret the pain. I don't regret the unreturned letters, the closed doors, the quiet goodbyes, because each time I grew, I stepped more fully into the mystery. I learned slowly that to love is not to possess, it is to offer, to give without needing to control, to trust without knowing. That is the leap. And it never gets easier, no matter how many times I've tried. The heart resists surrender, it wants guarantees, it wants safety, but Kierkegaard invites me to something higher. He invites me to love as a choice, not rooted in feelings, but in commitment. In the will to care, even when I don't feel like it, even when I am afraid. He speaks of love as a duty, not the cold kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that says, I will stay, I will care, I will be here, not because I must, but because I have chosen to. And that choice, it sanctifies everything. It tells me that love is not something that happens to me. It's something I create with trembling hands, with uncertain steps, with a heart that says, I may fall, but I will leap anyway. There is a figure in Kierkegaard's writing that has never left me. He calls him the Knight of Faith. A person who moves through the world silently, almost invisibly, yet carries within them a love so vast it touches the eternal. Not because it is loud, not because it is seen, but because it is pure, quiet, committed without demand, and somehow I've always wanted to be that. The Knight of Faith does not need recognition. They don't need the world to know their heart. They don't even need the beloved to return their love. They live with a kind of sacred inwardness, a knowing that the love they hold is already enough. I think of times when I've loved in secret, not in hiding, but in humility. Times when I cared for someone deeply but said nothing. When I gave in small ways, not to be noticed, but simply because the love itself was real. Those moments were not easy. There was longing, there was loneliness, but there was also beauty. Because in loving quietly, I discovered something rare, love that is free from outcome. Kierkegaard speaks of this as the highest form of love, a love that gives not because it will be fulfilled, but because it is right to give. A love that says yes to the other even if the other never hears it, even if they never say yes in return. That kind of love is not passive, it is not weak, it is the strongest love I know. It's a love that burns inwardly like a candle in a dark room. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't chase, it just is. A steady warmth, a silent offering, and yet the night of faith is not cold or distant, quite the opposite. They are deeply alive, they feel everything. They are fully present in the world, laughing, walking, working alongside others. Yet no one suspects the magnitude of what they carry inside. Sometimes I try to walk like that, to love without needing proof, to care without asking for credit, to show up over and over again even when no one notices. It's not always possible. My ego protests. It wants to be seen, it wants certainty. But when I can quiet that part of me just for a moment, I find a kind of peace that nothing else gives. Kierkegaard teaches that faith and love are not about loud declarations. They are about inward decisions, about holding the beloved in your heart even when the world doesn't understand, even when the future is unclear. And I think maybe that's what I've been learning all along. That real love isn't always shared. Sometimes it's sacrificed, given up, let go of. But even then, it's not lost. Because love, when it's true, changes the one who gives it. It makes us deeper, softer, braver. It makes us more human and perhaps in the end more divine. Kierkegaard had a word for what lies at the heart of love. He called it the absurd, not in the modern sense, not ridiculous or meaningless, but something deeper, something mysterious, a paradox that the mind cannot solve but the heart can hold. He believed that to truly love you must face this absurdity. You must stand before the unknown and still say yes, not because it makes sense, not because it's safe, but because somehow the soul knows. I've come to feel that in my own life. There are moments, quiet, haunting moments, when I realize that love has never been about certainty. It has always been about risk, about showing up in a world that offers no guarantees and choosing to give anyway. To trust anyway, to stay anyway. That to me is the miracle, that we keep loving even when it hurts, even when it fails, even when the story doesn't end the way we imagined. That's what Kierkegaard means by the leap of faith. It's not a leap into happiness, it's a leap into truth, into the unknown, into the terrifying beauty of another person's soul and our own. And yes, it's absurd to open your heart to someone who might not understand you, to offer your tenderness in a world that sometimes feels cold, to say, I will love you, even if you're met with silence. But isn't that where the most sacred beauty lives? Not in what's easy, not in what's expected, but in what is chosen again and again without needing a reason. I've come to believe that the most romantic thing in the world is not flowers or promises or poems. It is the staying, the quiet return, the unshakable devotion of someone who knows the risk and still loves. It is absurd, and it is holy. Kierkegaard said, "To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily, not to dare is to lose oneself." And I think of all the times I've dared to love. Not perfectly, not always wisely, but with sincerity, with trembling, with hope. And even when I've lost my footing, even when I've fallen, I have found something waiting in the dark. Grace. Grace that says you are not foolish to love, you are alive. Because love in its absurdity connects us to something beyond reason. It teaches us that there is meaning even where logic fails. That there is a purpose in simply caring, even if the world doesn't see it. Kierkegaard didn't offer answers, he offered a path. A path of choosing love again and again, not because we understand it, but because it calls us. Because something in our chest says yes, even if I cannot explain why. That is the beauty I carry with me now. Not the certainty of happy endings, but the sacredness of loving anyway. That is the leap. And I take it tenderly, bravely, every time I say I will love. There was a time in my life when I thought love meant merging, becoming one, losing myself in someone else's eyes, as if that were the highest form of intimacy. But it never quite felt right. The deeper I went into that kind of closeness, the more I noticed something missing. Myself, my freedom, my voice. And that's when I discovered Simone de Beauvoir. She offered a vision of love I had never fully considered. Not as fusion, not as sacrifice, but as mutual freedom. Two people standing side by side, whole, sovereign, and yet choosing each day to walk together. It was like breathing for the first time after holding my breath. She said love must never be about possession. That to truly love someone is to will their freedom. Not to mold them or keep them or even need them to stay, but to rejoice in their autonomy. I remember reading that and feeling a quiet kind of revolution inside me. Because it meant I could love without losing myself. I could love with my whole self, and in doing so invite the other to do the same. Simone lived this idea too. Her lifelong bond with Sartre wasn't traditional. It wasn't rooted in rules or roles or even certainty. It was rooted in freedom, in conversation, in the ongoing act of choosing. And that's what moved me most. The idea that love is not something we fall into, it's something we commit to. Not once, but again and again. Not out of duty, but from the deep well of respect and desire for the other's full becoming. She believed that love must be a dialogue, not a monologue. A dance where each person remains their own, while still moving in rhythm with the other. And that dance I've come to see is delicate. It requires trust. It requires letting go of control. It asks that I meet the person before me not as a reflection of my needs, but as a mystery. As someone I may never fully understand, yet can still cherish deeply. When I began to love this way, slowly, tentatively, it felt different. There was less clinging, less fear, more space, more presence, more peace, because I no longer had to shrink to be held. I no longer had to bend to be loved. I could just be. And in that being, I could see the other more clearly too. Not through the lens of longing or expectation, but through the lens of admiration, wonder, and care. Simone de Beauvoir taught me that love at its best is not a prison. It's a liberation. Two souls side by side becoming more themselves, not in spite of love, but because of it. There's something strangely beautiful about being seen without being seized. To have someone look at you, not as a possession or a project, but as a person, alive, complex, unfolding. That kind of gaze I've found is rare, but when it happens, it changes everything. Simone de Beauvoir believed that many of the troubles in love come from domination. The subtle ways we try to shape, contain, or control the people we love. Sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes just with our hopes. We don't mean to do it. Often we're just afraid. Afraid of losing the other. Afraid of being left behind. So we cling. We ask more than they can give. We start to make them part of our identity, our safety, our need. But love, when it becomes about control, begins to wither. Simone knew this. She watched how, through history, love was often twisted into hierarchy, one person surrendering, the other ruling. She rejected that completely. She believed that true intimacy can only grow in the absence of domination. At first, that idea felt almost too distant to me. I wondered if love without control would be too fragile, if it would drift apart like smoke. But I've learned the opposite is true. When there is room to breathe, to disagree, to evolve, something profound happens. Love deepens. It becomes less about fusion and more about fidelity. Fidelity to the other's freedom, not just your own. And that fidelity feels romantic in a way I never expected. It's romantic when someone listens to your no with the same softness as they receive your yes. It's romantic when someone doesn't need to fix your feelings but simply makes space for them. It's romantic when someone loves your independence, not just tolerates it but treasures it. Because in that love, there's no fear of being erased. There's a gentleness in being respected. I found myself resting more easily in that kind of love. My breath becomes slower, my voice steadier, my mind quieter, because I know I don't have to fight to exist. And perhaps the most sacred part is this: I learned to offer the same in return, to let the other be, to not fill in their silences, to not solve their contradictions, to trust that they too are becoming, and that my role is not to manage that process but to witness it with care. Simone wrote that love must never come at the cost of truth or freedom, and I hold that close, because I want to love in a way that doesn't shrink anyone. I want to love in a way that expands us both, not into sameness, but into full presence. Two lives, two stories, two freedoms, chosen again and again, not because we are incomplete alone, but because we honor what we become together. I used to think that love was a single decision. You meet someone, you feel the pull, you say yes, and that yes would be enough to carry everything forward. But over time, I've learned what Simone de Beauvoir always knew, that love is not one decision. It is many, sometimes spoken, often silent, repeated in small gestures, shared glances, quiet returns. Love is not something you fall into and stay. It is something you rise to again and again. Simone believed that love, to be truly free, must be chosen daily, not out of obligation or inertia, but out of a genuine desire to walk beside the other as they become who they are meant to be. And I feel the truth of that deep in my chest. There have been days when I've felt far from love, distant, confused, unsure, when even the gentlest forms of connection felt hard to reach. And yet in those moments, something softer than will brought me back. A kind of remembering, a quiet choosing. Not because everything was perfect, but because something in me still said, yes, you. Not the idealized you, not the you I imagined, but the real you. The changing, growing, sometimes distant you. And in saying yes, I found something steady. Because this kind of love isn't about holding on, it's about holding space. It doesn't chain the beloved to the past or to our needs. It allows them to evolve. It blesses their freedom. It watches them walk toward their own light and hopes that your paths still align. That hope is delicate. It doesn't demand. It doesn't trap. It simply invites. And what I've found is that when love is offered like this, not as need but as grace, it becomes even more powerful. It invites the other not to stay out of fear or habit, but because they too choose. There's something deeply romantic in being chosen by someone who is free, someone who doesn't need you but wants you. Not just once, but always anew.